Thank you for releasing me, Spyro. Free 10 dragons in the artisan world.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
Find dragons first. That's all I can tell you.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to When Geeks Craft. I'm Nicole and I'm one of the geeks here that likes to craft things. Today we're going to be making a diorama inspired by Spyro the Dragon. I played Spyro a ton as a kid and I've always wanted a small model of him in the house, so let's make one. We start off at the 3D printer getting the model of the crystal dragon all printed out. After the model was printed, I spray painted the parts with gray filler primer off camera, and then on camera I started filling the remainder of the layer lines with the When Geeks Craft layer line filling secret sauce, UV resin. After the resin cured, I used some tiny little sanding sticks and gave his body a good once over to get rid of any uneven spots. After the body was all smooth, it was time to start gluing. And with every project that gets super glued together, you will sit there forever, thinking about your life and choices. And you will be forced to watch your pieces fuse together in excruciating excess, unless you call in reinforcements to help apply some accelerant. Plan ahead, folks. Thanks, Turi. Just put accelerant right here.
Just hold it for a couple seconds longer. There you go.
Some more UV resins hid my glue seams, some more sanding, and this little guy was good to go. Oh god, why is this table so sticky? Sticky. I have a dragon printed. I have a Spyro printed. Now we just gotta try to make something out of this. Don't really know what it's gonna look like, but we're just gonna try to wing it and make something cool. I plan on using some pink insulation foam board, and I was thinking about making basically a layer where Spyro is at the bottom and he goes up to a higher elevation where the crystal dragon will be on top. So I think what we need to do first is make a big block of foam and then start carving into it. After spending a long time cutting out circles without a circle jig, I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out the steps and how I wanted them to be laid out. I used each level as a reference point for the next level. I really wanted things to be compact, but I wanted to give everything enough space. I ended up printing out some gems from the game to use on the stairs to add some additional details going up to the crystal dragon. Once I had a shape I liked, I hot snotted all the pieces together and used the Proxon to get everything to a good uniform-ish shape. Next up was hiding all my seams. After discovering my joint compound was overrun by mold, I excessively washed my hands and workstations and threw that container away. Then I went straight to the nearest Home Depot and got the smallest spackly schmooey tube that I could find because we only had about a month left here in Wisconsin and I didn't want another mold disaster along the way. I used a small putty knife and started pushing the pink goop into all the little nooks and crannies, making the multiple layers look more like a uniform wall. This will all be for nothing though in a little bit because I decided to cover it all up with paper mache shop towels. After getting the outside walls prepped, I decided it wouldn't be a When Geeks Craft project if I didn't incorporate resin somehow. So just off camera, I hollowed out a section for a resin pond and filled in the crappy cutout job with some more of that pink schmoo. Now back to those outside walls. I covered up all that stuff I did before by using some Mod Podge and blue shop towels. I decided I wanted more of a weird texture effect, so I soaked shop towels in Mod Podge and kind of just shoved it into place on the walls. It ended up working surprisingly well and made for a pretty natural looking wall. Once the Mod Podge finished drying, I used some more of that pink schmoo to add some texture to the outer wall because sometimes you just can't stop adding layers. Finally, it was foam detail time. I used a crappy old soldering iron to melt away the foam to create some stone blocks on the steps. And before you feel the need to comment telling me that this was unsafe because of fumes, know that the windows were open, I had a mask on, and you can do it differently. Once the stones were added, I yet again brought out the trusty pink schmoo and added textures to the top of the stone. I finished it off by frosting the top like a cake and speckling the model with my knife. While the top pink stuff was drying, I applied a primer layer to the already dried outside using some Mod Podge and acrylic black paint. This creates a protective skin on your model and accepts paint super well. When the top was finished drying, I gave it the same Mod Podge coating. I started by applying darker base coats and working up through the lighter colors through many dry brush layers. The stone sidewalls got a series of grays, browns, greens, as well as some washes to help with the details. The grass areas received a base layer of brown and then multiple different greens. Spyro's world is pretty bright in colors, and it took a bit to get something that didn't look too artificially green, but just enough. After the greens were applied, I put some Mod Podge on the surfaces and added some Woodland Scenics fine turf. If I had static grass, I think that would have looked nicer, but this is one of my first dioramas in a long time, so for what it is, I think it's pretty good. After everything was dry, I applied some watered down PVA glue to all the grassy areas and sprinkled some more fine turf on there to add some more texture. After even more drying and even more waiting, I finally started painting the stone steps. I wanted the steps to look brighter, so I based the stones in a light tan, and then I instantly stopped working on that because my crafting brain really wanted to not be painting rocks, and added more light green to the model. After I finished that, I went right back to the steps and finished out the coloring and added some strong tone wash to everything. Then it was time to focus a bit on the main characters. Each model was coated in Vallejo's black base coat. Then I took them over to the airbrush for painting. I really wanted minimal brush strokes on these models, so I opted to using the airbrush. The colors were custom mixed using a variety of blues and greens and whites for the Crystal Dragon, and a mixture of purples and pinks for Spyro. I have no footage of Spyro being sprayed in the booth, but that's just because I'm a bad YouTuber. After putting away the airbrush, I remembered that I forgot that I had gemstones, so I did paint those by hand. Without breathing too much, I painted all the details on Spyro. This was nerve-wracking because his base coat was perfect, so I went really slow to make sure I didn't mess up. The orange was applied first, and then I dry brushed on the yellow top coat. Then I went back to the Crystal Dragon, where I finished it off by adding some highlights to all the edges. Off camera, I added a layer of clear acrylic spray paint to both models to really let them shine. Then it was assembly time. I glued all the gems in place onto their steps and added some foliage around the model. I put some plants into the area where the resin pool was going to go and let them dry. I learned from my Pikachu diorama to really let the resin area dry completely, so I gave this model a good amount of drying time before I poured the resin pool. The foliage is a mixture of leftover wedding decorations from like 4 years ago and nicer woodland scenic pieces. I just keep a box full of nature and pull that out when necessary for models. I applied a layer of glossy Mod Podge to the outside of anything that looked like stone. At the last second, I decided to repaint Spyro's eyes. They were looking a little nuts before. Now they look better. Here you can also see how shiny he was with the gloss finish. I think these models would have looked a little bit nicer had I used a resin printer for them, but we were in the middle of packing and our resin printer was already gone. So, maybe next time. Finally, it was time to pour the resin. Using a 2-part resin from Illuminate, I mixed a small amount of 1:1 ratio resin and dyed it bluish-greenish, and then poured it in. I used a heat gun to remove some of the bubbles, and then I just let it cure. Then it was done. Time for some beauty shots. I want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters, especially our super fans. It's because of you guys that we can continue to make fun stuff. $2 gets you access to all of our files, $5 gets your name in a video. If you like seeing me work on dioramas, let me know. I want to do more stuff like this in the future, especially while we're living in a temporary apartment and I have a much smaller workspace. If you have any ideas for future builds, leave them in the comments below. As always, tell your friends about us and give us a sub if you like what you see. Thanks guys, see you next time.